Hi everybody, it's Manucha for Moms and Crafters, and this is my channel where I love teaching you crafting basics and unique twists on crafts that you may have already tried. So today we're going to discuss making these clay trivets using air dry clay, and we're also going to discuss using watercolors to create a gorgeous, gorgeous finish that really highlights any texture that you add to the clay. First things first, quality does matter when using air dry clay, and there are a few brands that I can recommend. I am using Das for this one. Pull off a nice fistful of clay, I would say about the size of a baseball, give or take, and you're going to be using something of equal height on each side to be able to help you roll it out to a consistent thickness. Now, I started off with books, and you'll see that later I switched to sort of clay height guides. I'm not exactly sure why. Anyway, you are rolling it out, switching directions as needed until you have you have it rolled out to a thickness that makes sense for a trivet. I would say you don't want to do it crazy thick, maybe about a quarter of an inch, which is the minimum thickness usually for having air dry clay come out nice and solid and not brittle. Um, Keep on making sure that you keep it in the general proportion that you're going to want your final shape to be as you roll it out. If you do decide to make it a little bit thicker, you're just going to need a little bit more dry time. So go ahead and roll that out until it's exactly the shape and the size and the thickness that you want it to be. When you are happy with the thickness, you're going to take anything with texture. Now I'm using this kind of like gauzy. I forgot what it's called. It's kind of like a table runner. It's like an open mesh. That's probably what it would be called. And I'm rolling it in. They do make special clay texture sheets. You can use those. Some people like to use sandpaper, but for this, I specifically like something that will form a pattern. And you can see that I did allow it to curve to create this texture. And the reason why I want to do this is so that the way that watercolor works is that it really, really highlights the texture of your thing that you're making. So if you don't have a deliberate texture, it's going to catch just any silly crack. So you want a deliberate texture for it to highlight. Now, I just went ahead and used a craft knife that's dedicated to clay to cut an abstract, think about like a kidney shaped pool. So just an abstract shape. You can't print out an outline of any simple shape that you want. You can do a heart. You can do really just anything. And it should just be the general size that'll fit under a hot dish since we are making a trivet, and you're cutting that out with a craft knife, and you may need to go another round and just to work it around your design as you pull off the excess. So go ahead and pull off that excess. Now, without going too crazy, we're going to clean up those little edges a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you go too much over your texture, then you're going to erase some of it. I did a drop, so it's sort of like all the way at the edge. It kind of smooths out, which actually does give it a bit of a polished look. But go ahead and just smooth out the edges so you don't have too many like fluffs from the rough cut sticking out. Don't worry too much about this step. Just do it a little bit just to clean it up. Now you're going to want to let it dry completely. Dry times for these things vary too much for me to give you a time. I would say plan to have at least overnight for each side. So after you give one side overnight, you're going to flip it over to let the other side dry overnight. But if your place is humid, it might take longer and all that. So I'm not going to give you an exact time frame because that would be deceptive. Now here's another step that can seem a little bit intimidating, but really you just need to do a little bit of light cleanup. There's going to be all that little like fluff from the edge where it was sitting on the sort of base of your work surface, that I forgot what it's called, maybe burrs. So just taking coarse sandpaper and giving it literally like a minute, nothing more, will help you make the edges a lot smoother and give you a much more polished final result. Again, we are not, using different grades of sandpaper to smooth this completely and to fire polish it. We're just making a basic smooth edge. Now it's time to watercolor. Now, when it comes to watercolor painting, everybody has their preferences. For a project like this, you don't need any fancy watercolor paints. I happen to find that this Praying brand palette that I'm using has very, very rich color, and I really do like it. I find that the basic color palette allows me to pretty much get any color I want. So even though it's a simple palette, I'll mix it up a little bit, on the other half of the palette and combine the colors. And I am using a water brush because that will allow me to flood it on demand. But again, it's based on your preferences, and just go ahead and paint your trivet. Now you're going to see that it's going to pull into every single crack, which is why we made that deliberate texture. If you don't have a deliberate texture, if you have little creases, and you can see I do have some of those, but they sort of, blend in with the whole thing, it is going to highlight every single flaw. So we made those deliberate flaws to kind of embrace that. Another thing with working with watercolor paints on air dry clay is that you really can't overwork it because you're kind of like re-wetting your clay. So if you really like try doing fancy designs and all that, you really kind of want to get it right the first try, which is kind of why I just did this basic shaded pattern. And look, I personally think it looks gorgeous. And I do kind of maybe regret not using slightly richer colors. I did water it down quite a bit to let it flow easier. But again, it's a very, very forgiving craft that just comes out gorgeous. So go ahead and watercolor your clay trivet to your satisfaction. And when you're done, you're going to want to let it dry completely bone dry before proceeding to the next step. Because the next step is going to be sealing it. And if you seal it before it's completely dry, you're basically trapping moisture. And keep in mind that because you wet an air dry clay creation, you didn't totally reactivate the clay, but you kind of did a little bit. So you're really going to want to give it overnight or even 2 days, I would recommend, to let it get bone dry. Now that our creation is bone dry, we are going to use 2 coats of dishwasher safe Mod Podge to seal it. Now, a trivet does not need to be dishwasher safe. The reason I use this formula of Mod Podge is because I find that I can then really clean it of any spills, but I do only plan to hand wash it. I go all the way around on the edges, and then after the first side is dry, I flip it over to the back. I do recommend doing a second side as well. A second coat as well. You really don't want to miss any spots, because again, then it's going to leak through to the clay underneath when you try washing it. So go ahead and complete that. And I will remind you that dishwasher safe Mod Podge does require 28 days to completely cure. It will be wipeable before that. So if you need this more urgently, it'll be fine. But you definitely don't want to give it a good soapy wash and definitely not dishwash it before 28 days. Now, a final step that I don't showcase that I actually do recommend doing is to add some felt sliders to the base or cork sliders or some kind of base just to make it a bit more of a functional project. And your ear dry clay coaster is complete. And look how beautiful the watercolors look absorbing into the ear dry clay and giving it really that ceramic like look that has the color as part of the actual product. Now all you need to do is put it on your table when you need that little bit of extra protection from hot dishes. It goes beautifully with this light and airy tablescape. And I will go ahead and shamelessly plug my Instagram at Moms and Crafter and at Inspiring Jewish Motherhood, where I often share these gorgeous tablescapes that include some DIY and some clever combinations to really set a beautiful table. You can also find me on TikTok at Moms and Crafters. Read the full tutorial at momsandcrafters.com, where I share a full list of supplies that I used and even more tips such as alternative finishes and glaze ideas. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, do make sure you subscribe to my channel where I love sharing doable craft ideas with ample instructions so that anybody can do it and have successful results. Hit the like button so more people can see it, and of course, drop a comment if you have any questions or suggestions or any tutorials you'd like me to share next.